So what makes me cranky about Rogue One? Musical cues that go nowhere. Look, if you're gonna steal a little bit of a famous theme like the Force theme or the Imperial March, don't trail off into something else with your last bar. Either finish it or just don't use it, because it's really distracting to hear a musical cue that you know really well and have it abruptly change 2/3 of the way in, particularly if all you're gonna do is invert it. Michael Giacchino did this with the Star Trek reboot too, so I guess he's like the stormtrooper of composers, only able to hit the right notes half the time. Which brings me to another thing that makes me cranky here. I get that stormtroopers in the original trilogy are famous for not being able to hit anything, but we could have corrected that in a movie full of red shirts, right? This movie would be over about 1/3 of the way in if any of these guys could aim down the middle of a hallway. I guess you could call that an homage, but it was so stupid at one point I actually said under my breath in the theater, well, you should be dead and the movie should be over right here. Fortunately, Gareth Edwards is an otherwise competent storyteller, because Rogue One is actually a pretty good movie overall, particularly when you compare it to The Force Awakens. In fact, this movie really makes me dislike The Force Awakens even more than I did when I saw it, because Rogue One now proves beyond a doubt you can make a new entry in a franchise without having to rehash one of the previous ones. Not to mention it gives 2 middle fingers way, way up to the Star Trek reboot, since it also proves you don't need to throw out your whole continuity in order to tell an as-yet untold prequel story. Could the nerds nitpick every single continuity error Rogue One probably introduces? Yup. Will they? Yup. Will it stop them from enjoying the hell out of this movie? No. Take some notes, JJ, before you decide to set another popular franchise's continuity on fire to make another reboot that we're too chicken shit to actually call a reboot movie. If nothing else, Rogue One gets massive points in my book for not being a pale imitation of a better movie I've already seen, which has been a real problem this year. And it really makes me cranky that something like this couldn't have been Episode 7 instead of JJ's Mary Sue retread. Because the fatal flaw at the heart of Rogue One for me, the thing that makes it just a good movie instead of an awesome one, is the fact that it's a prequel about an event so minor that it doesn't even rate an explanation in the original Star Wars. This is probably the one movie where I didn't have to edit my thoughts to avoid spoilers, because there's nothing for me to spoil. You already know what happens if you've seen Episode 4. I really had no reason to be invested in anything in this movie, because not only do I know they're going to succeed in getting the Death Star plans, but that the rebels will go on to destroy that Death Star, another one after that, and then ultimately declare victory, after which they'll destroy a bigger, sun-sucking Death Star later. In addition to that, since none of these people are ever mentioned in Star Wars again, you also know that even if they get out alive, they obviously will disappear into irrelevance. It just robs Rogue One of any real lasting impact, and so what could have been one of my favorite movies of the year thus becomes a movie that I enjoyed, but we'll probably forget about once it leaves the headlines. Imagine if instead, these were our brand new Episode 7 characters on a mission to steal some critical piece of information about the burgeoning First Order. You'd actually have to wonder, will they fail? Will any of them survive? Will they get captured? Will they get turned to the dark side by the new Sith badass? That would have added a key bit of mystery and suspense that Rogue One just lacks. Further exacerbating that problem is the fact that you really do not spend enough time with these characters at the beginning to have any real emotional attachment to them when the inevitable happens. The movie actually starts out with a really choppy introduction to some of these people, so I was actually getting pretty worried that the whole film was going to be all awkward like that. Fortunately, it eventually finds a better rhythm, but the only character who ever gets any real kind of development is the female lead, Jyn Erso, who is thankfully not a Mary Sue like Rey. She's played by Felicity Jones, who does a fine job with what she's given to do, but, there's not much there, and her obligatory rally the troops speech kind of falls flat. Other than her, the only real standout is the droid K2SO, who's voiced by Alan Tudyk. Man, that guy gets around lately. Anyway, he provides a sarcastic comedy relief, and if he weren't funny, he'd be utterly forgettable due to how little he actually contributes. Most of the time, they leave him behind on the ship. Of course, because this is a Star Wars movie, we also need a Jedi, but since this is pre-Luke and we don't want to stomp all over him and Obi-Wan, our Jedi isn't really a Jedi. He's just a blind dude in tune enough with the Force to dodge blasters and beat stormtroopers' asses with a staff and some crazy martial arts. Give him a lightsaber and he'd probably be another person on the list of nobodies who can stomp Kylo Ren into the ground. Blind Guy is joined by a Marine-type dude who shoots things and snarks about the whole Force-using thing. Those two are friends, and, that's about it for them. Cool martial arts, bro. Can we get some idea who you are now? Speaking of characters who don't get to do much, if you're going to this to see Vader, well, he's not that big of a player either. Fortunately, his appearance here completely redeems his character from that whole no moment back in the prequels. So what time he does get isn't wasted, but if you were hoping for a long game of cat and mouse between Vader and the rebels, you're probably going to be disappointed. We also have a couple of old characters who return thanks to the magic of computers, and while it's still pretty obvious they're CGI, we're definitely climbing the other side of the uncanny valley now. It won't be much longer before we can resurrect any actor from any point in their life if we like. When they finally get around to fixing the timeline in Star Trek, we'll be able to have Shatner and Co back for the end of it at this rate. Unless you think I'm just here to bag on this whole movie the whole time, let's talk about some of the stuff it gets really right in addition to Vader's redemption. For one, it looks beautiful. This movie actually has a variety of locations that aren't just desert planet and ice planet and jungle planet. From ships to space stations to sandy beaches, this feels like a real, actual universe. And since it's not focused entirely on Skywalkers, it helps to expand the Star Wars galaxy behind the handful of people and places we seem to run into every single time. The space battles are incredibly well shot and full of superbly diverse ships as opposed to just a half a dozen X-Wings. The Rebels even use actual guerrilla tactics instead of just trying to have a straight-up shootout with the Empire all the time. And the action itself is fantastic. It's really well shot and perfectly paced, unlike JJ's frenetic twist the camera into weird angles and shine lens flare in your face all the time style. The Death Star itself is also incredibly well utilized. There's some awesome shots of this thing that just really hammer home how big and how obscenely dangerous it is. And the movie finally canonizes an explanation for a huge gripe everyone's always had about it, which I won't spoil, but I'm pretty sure, like everything else about this movie, you know exactly what I mean. Not only is it a very smart, believable way to deal with this problem, it's at the heart of this story, so it doesn't feel like some tacked-on afterthought. They don't address the other big problem with the whole Death Star plans thing, but you can't have everything, unfortunately. So overall, I enjoyed Rogue One quite a bit. It really is just like the Death Star, an impressive feat of movie making hampered by that one critical weakness. I'm sure it'll destroy the box office either way, but as with The Force Awakens, it probably won't have the kind of lasting impact any of the other Star Wars films had. This is a true theater-quality experience, so I would in fact recommend joining the legions of fans going out to see it, since I know you were all desperately waiting for my take on it rather than going 15 times on opening night, right? For those of my Padawans who didn't wait to go see it, what did you think? Did knowing the outcome of this whole thing hurt the movie for you, or did you enjoy it anyway? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Then let the Force guide you into clicking the like button and subscribing to my channel.